The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Friday night. Not a typical night for me to do a show, but since didn't do a show yesterday, this is the makeup show on a Friday night. All right, so we're going to jump in there. We're going to talk about American decline, talk a little bit more about Richmond, north of Richmond. Got a lot of feedback on that. Feedback? Is that the terminology? That's the nice terminology. Anyway, we'll talk a little bit about that in the context of American decline, because I think it's very relevant to the context of American decline. We will, so, this is the topic. It's a negative topic, but maybe we can find some positives in it. Maybe we can find some uplifting ideas within it to inspire you guys. Certainly, we will find we know what the solutions are. So let's take that as the positive. What else do I want to say? Yeah, remind you, everybody, Super Chat is functioning. So if you want to ask questions, please ask them. Again, this is your opportunity to kind of get to me. This is your opportunity to raise issues, to raise questions, to raise disagreements, to tell me I'm full of it. If you think I got Richmond, north of Richmond wrong, come here and ask a question and challenge me on it. That shouldn't be that. You shouldn't let me go. You should challenge it. But the way to do that is through the super chat. That way, I see it. I'm committed to answering everybody who asks a super chat question. Everybody who asks get answered. People who submit questions above $20 get priority. But generally, I answer everybody. All right, let's see. What else? Quickly, there will be a show tomorrow, 3 p.m. East Coast time. Tomorrow I'm taking on China. So today is the United States. Next time, China, and we're all set. And then we've covered the world, right? I've done Russia, Ukraine, so that's it. I mean, what else is there to talk about? All right. I'm considering if there's any other announcements I need to make. I don't think so. I think we're all set. I think we're good. All right. So let's jump in. American decline. So how do we measure this decline? Is there indeed a decline in America? Because by a lot of measures, it's never been better in America. Certainly, economically, we're richer than we ever were. And in spite of what he says in Richmond, the Richmond wages are higher than they've ever been in real terms. In spite of what people complain about all the time, the purchasing power of those wages is higher than it ever was. Technology has made life cheaper than it ever was. Indeed, trade with China has made life cheaper than it ever was. So if you're working in America, your standard of living, what you can do with that money, what's available to you with the exception of real estate and education, you've never had it better. Real estate is difficult. Real estate is tough. If you live on the coasts, if you live in a city where demand is so high that for political reasons they don't keep supply to match it, but in most of the country, real estate is not that expensive. Interest rates are high right now. Mortgages are high. We talked about it this morning. That's expensive, but interest rates are lower than they were in the 1990s, early 90s, or 90s generally. They're lower than they were in the 70s, in the 80s. So mortgages are lower now than they were back then. Real estate prices are high. We know the cause of that, lack of building. But overall, people live in America in bigger houses than they used to. They live in bigger houses even though they have smaller families. They drive nicer cars. They have iPhones. They have the internet. They have ChatGPT 4. They have GPSs. in so many dimensions of our lives, particularly in the material dimensions of our life, life has never been better. Never been better. So what am I talking about? What are you talking about, Yaron? American decline. It's not decline. And not only that, giving the positive case here, right? Not only that, America's in better shape than anywhere else in the world. Europe is significantly poorer than America, growing at significantly lower rate. People make significantly less money, live in significantly smaller homes, drive significantly smaller cars, and have just a significantly lower standard of living. They're significantly poorer than average Americans, average Europeans, average Americans. Japan is significantly poor. There's no country in the world. There's no significant economy, large economy in the world that matches the United States in terms of wealth, in terms of prosperity, in terms of standard of living, in terms of quality of life. So from a material perspective, things have never been better. So why are we in decline? Never been better, never been richer than other places. You know, the gap is larger than it used to be. But in almost every other realm, there is an enormous amount of angst, of frustration, of envy, of resentment, of hatred. America is a divided nation, deeply divided nation, maybe more deeply divided than any point since the Civil War. People despise each other. Poll after poll after poll shows kind of the deep, deep resentment some Americans hold against other Americans. So culturally, we're in decline. We're unbelievably pessimistic. We're convinced that life is terrible, that we're in decline materially, that we're losing, that the guy next door has more than I do, and that's not fair, that inequality is exploding, and that injustice is exploding, and at every corner something bad is happening. You know, people are becoming obese. It's real. And we're convinced that our money is funding their obesity through the welfare state. That's to some extent real as well. So there's a lot of frustration, a lot of angst, a lot of anger, a lot of envy, a lot of resentment in our culture. We have a culture that is the opposite of, we'll talk about the way America used to be, or at least used to be in some parts of America. That, you know, a lot of Americans, even on the material side, have lost their belief in the American dream. Americans today are convinced their kids will be poorer than they are. By the way, that was true 10 years ago as well. It seems to be a recurring theme. Every 10 years or so, parents think they're the last generation that was richer than their kids, than their parents. We're pessimistic for our children. And indeed, even on the economic front, even though we're richer than we've ever been, and standard of living, quality of life are up in some dimensions, as I said, it's hard to buy a house. Housing is unbelievably expensive. It's expensive to get an education, but it's also not clear what value education has. What do I get by going to college other than large debts? People are very negative about the upside of education. And the economy itself is growing slowly. And every 10 years, there's some kind of major crisis. And then we kind of come out of the crisis and we grow slowly. Some people and some companies do fantastically well. But on average, the economy generally is just growing slowly. It's stagnating. It's growing. But slowly, much slower than it used to. And I think people feel that. People know what it was like when the economy was moving along. People know what it was like when new inventions kind of came out of nowhere and changed the world fast and regularly. People know what it was like when their standard of living was rising, not just rising, but rising fast, and they had a vision of the future that said, oh, my kids' standard of living is going to rise fast. This is going to continue growing. Today's standard of living are rising, but slowly. The only dimension in which we're really achieving progress and success is digital and electronic and available more to some people than others. And the general sense is, because it's true, is the economy is moving slowly. The welfare state has created real resentment. You see that in Richmond, north of Richmond. Why do I have to work for a living? BS wages. I do overtime, but it's worthless. I work for the man. Why do I have to work for a living? Other people here, they're getting checks for nothing. They do nothing. And look at them. They're obese. So there's this resentment, in the book, I think that's The Myth of Inequality by Phil Graham. Is it The Myth of Inequality? Anyway, Phil Graham has a book that came out last year. Let me just find... Phil Graham was the former Texas senator. Let me just find this. Former Texas senator, and he put out a book last year. The Myth of American Inequality. Right? And one of the points he makes in The Myth of American Inequality is that if you're receiving welfare, and if you're working, your standard of living is if you got a lower middle class job, and you're receiving welfare, your standard of living is about the same. And yet one person is working, and one person is not. And yet, their income, the amount of money they receive, is about the same. Yeah, he didn't say he didn't want to work for a living, but he didn't want bullshit wages. Right? Wages provided by a market. That's what he said. Wages provided by, not the government as far as I can tell, but by Richmond. Whether they're north of Richmond or south of Richmond, Richmond. So I think stagnation, I think the perception that inequality is unjust, even though, as Phil Graham shows in his book, The Myth of American Inequality, inequality has now risen in the United States. If you take into account the welfare state, it's actually shrunk. People resent their neighbors because they don't know if what their neighbors have, they earned. They resent Washington because the government is constantly violating their rights, is constantly interfering in their lives. They resent reality because reality forces them to actually have a job. Well, not necessarily, because some people get welfare and they don't. Keep going back to that. So America's in decline spiritually. America's in decline socially. Think about that. The real hatred that exists today between Democrats and Republicans. I mean, survey after survey show that Republicans and Democrats hate each other. Not just dislike each other. Not just disagree with one another. But but literally hate each other. I mean, you see this in like dating surveys. Would you date a Republican? No, if I'm a Democrat. Would you date a Democrat? No, if I'm a Republican. I mean, I don't think that was the case 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago. I don't think everything was political. Everything was politicized. So, I think in many respects, America is in decline. In the prospects for the economy, it's in decline. And culturally, socially, it's in decline. It's become a vulgar culture. It's become an angry culture. Now again, there are areas, even culturally and socially, that are better. We don't have Jim Crow laws. If you're black in the South, life is much better today than it was 50, 60 years ago. Not that some of the black activists would admit to that, but that's the reality. Much better. If you're gay, life is much better today in America than it was 20 years ago, never mind 50, 60 years ago. But overall, the atmosphere, the attitude of Americans is resentful and angry, intolerant of disagreement. Not intolerant in a sense of I have to tolerate every view, but intolerant in the sense of I don't want to listen to people who disagree with me. We become tribal. We become clannish. We don't associate with people who agree with us. That is American decline. It's a country that lacks unity, lacks benevolence, lacks optimism in the future, lacks excitement and energy about what is possible in the future. It lacks, we've lived through a period, at least on the pessimism side, I think the 70s were very similar to this. And in many respects, the 70s were worse from an existential sense. Crime was much higher than it is today. The economy was in a much worse situation than it is today. But there was still an American spirit underneath that all. So that Ronald Reagan could flip it very quickly. First of all, he could win an election. And secondly, he could make a few speeches and people became very optimistic and very positive and very energized and very passionate and very productive. And the 1980s and 1990s were periods of real economic growth and real economic success and prosperity and a culture. We had arguments and disagreements and didn't like each other and everything else, but the American dream seemed to be alive and well. People believed in it and people were striving to make it better, and generally there was a certain benevolence in the air. Within 20 years, that's gone. It doesn't exist today. And we've seen it being sucked out of the American culture and sucked out of the American society over the last, since second term in Bush, maybe since 9/11, but certainly since Bush's second term. Sucked out. So, yeah, I think in important ways America is indeed in decline. So what caused the decline? What caused the decline? I think to understand it, we first again have to talk about the positive. What made America unique? What made America great? What made America optimistic and energized? And what made American society, relatively united around goals? And, what made Americans patriotic? Patriotic in a sense of love of country, a country worth living. What is it that made America great to begin with? That created a country that has been so successful materially, but also, so ultimately there'd be no revolutions here. There's been very little political violence in our history. Again, 60s come to mind as a period of particularly bad political violence, but most of that has subsided. January 6th was horrific political violence, but that's now. Now you can imagine political violence. Now everybody's talking about political violence. Indeed, some people have been talking about, less so right now, but have been talking about a civil war in America, a new civil war. So what made America so peaceful, relatively speaking? What made America so benevolent? What made it possible for the American dream to be alive and well, and for people to believe in it and perpetuate it? Well, what is a kind of the average American life in a thriving, successful society look like? It's basically an individual owning a home, family, kids, suburbs, has a car, has a job, optimistic about the future, devotes time to advancing his career, learning what he needs to learn in order to master the new technologies coming about. Works hard. And, befriends some of the neighbors. Doesn't befriend other of the neighbors. Basically lives under the motto, as I think most Americans have in history, I'll leave you alone, you leave me alone, we'll cooperate when it makes sense for us to cooperate, when it's in our self-interest. When there's a value to be shared, we won't. When there's none, we don't have to be friends, we can be friends. If we're not friends, that doesn't mean we're enemies. And each one to his own. I'm not, an individual like that is not afraid of others, not resentful of others. It's somebody focused on his own life, on his own career, on his own family, on his own success, on his own ability to move upwards. He views his fellow Americans as, fellow travelers. Very much live and let live. What America had going for it was this sense of freedom. People came here with all kinds of rotten ideas. But America, it didn't matter what your ideas were. You either made a life for yourself or you didn't. You either succeeded at living or you didn't. You either fit into this way of life of live and let live, or you probably failed at living. There was a strong self-selection bias. Many people went back to the homeland. Others who stayed, maybe the first generation didn't get it, but the children did. An idea of live and let live, the idea of liberty, the idea of freedom, the idea of individualism, the idea of responsibility for your own life, responsibility for your own ideas, responsibility for your own soul. In a large extent, you got to decide who you associated with, who you didn't. And again, put aside all the problem areas that clearly existed, whether it was racism, whether it was overtly passionate religionists. America would not have succeeded if that was the dominant thing. America would not have succeeded if that was what overwhelmed everything else. The reality is that America succeeded because individuals felt free in America. And they were left free in America to live their lives and shape their own destiny, to live their lives and shape their own lives, to live their lives and do, for the most part, as they saw fit, with the agreement that they would not violate their neighbor's rights and the neighbor wouldn't violate theirs. And just in case, there was a government to make sure that that didn't happen, or if it did, the right party was penalized for it. America, for the longest time, at least for a majority of its population, protected the rights of individuals. If left them free to associate or not, it left them free to live their lives as they saw fit. And that enabled the entrepreneurial spirit. It enabled, hard work and people taking responsibility for that work and feeling like they owned it. And I think even the attitude to taxes, even though, I think we should always have a negative attitude to taxes, I think was a lot smaller back then, because the basic idea was, I pay my taxes. Why? I pay my taxes so that my rights can be protected. So that we have a military to protect us, so we have a police force around. They also believed in education and in infrastructure and things like that. But generally, the idea was taxes are there to serve my interest, to facilitate the ability of government to protect my rights. It wasn't perfect. It's never been perfect. America has never been perfect. Far from it. Maybe on the day they signed the Declaration of Independence. But that's about it. But they had the right idea. The general concept was right. The direction was the right direction. And America thrived as long as it held to that direction. The direction of individual liberty, the direction of individual rights, the direction of personal responsibility. Responsibility for your mind as well as your material possessions. So what happened? Well, what happened was that vision of America, that view of America, that reality of America was never grounded in a solid philosophical underpinning. It was never grounded in a proper philosophical defense. So it eroded slowly, very slowly. But it eroded. People say it's all about the Constitution, right? That's what we need to follow. But it's the understanding of the Constitution that matters. Constitution is just words on a piece of paper. Understanding of those words can change over time, and it did. And starting in the late 19th century, the understanding of what that Constitution represented and what that meant changed. People forgot, or gave up, or never knew, or never understood. And all those continental philosophies, the philosophies from Europe, started to seep into America. And slowly, the individuals mattered less. We had to consider the economy and society and the state and the nation. Monopolies, they're bad for the state, the nation. We have to find an optimal arrangement for business. Not one that is determined voluntarily between people, but one that we, the philosopher kings in this case, can dictate. So you get antitrust laws. And you implement those antitrust laws. And you start chipping away at businesses. And at the idea of earned success. The idea that merit matters. The idea that we all can voluntarily choose who to deal with and who not. Not anymore. In some cases, the government will tell you who you can and who you cannot deal with. And then we slowly chip away and start regulating what businesses can do, what they can say, who they can feed, who they can do what to. And then starting in the 1930s, we start redistributing wealth. We start not only taxing you for the things that you seem to be benefiting directly from, but we start taxing you in order to redistribute wealth. And we start sending you, the American citizen, a clear message. We don't trust you to take care of yourself. We don't trust you to plan for your own future. We don't trust your mind. We don't trust reason. We don't trust your ability to think long term. So we are going to devise Social Security for you. We're going to make sure that you save enough. We're going to force you to save. And we're going to call it'll be a tax, and we're going to use the money in the meantime. But we're going to force you to put the money aside, and then you'll become dependent on us. And of course, Social Security takes away, and Medicare takes away one element of, okay, I don't need to be responsible for myself when I'm old. I don't need to think about that problem. Okay, that's taken care of. Somebody else is taking care of that. The government's taking care of that. And why shouldn't I think about it? Well, because they tell me I can't. I'm not good at it. I'm irresponsible. They tell me long-term planning is a fool's game. They tell me reason is impotent. Reason is incompetent. The reason is not my tool. I cannot live by it. They're telling me now what products I can buy, what products I can't buy. They're telling me now what I should save for retirement, what I shouldn't. They're telling me now how much I can pay my employees and how much I can't. They're telling me now I'm too stupid or too exploitative or too greedy or too something to negotiate salaries with my own employees or to sell whatever products I deem appropriate and that my customers deem appropriate to buy. They'll tell me I'm incompetent. They tell me I'm a fool. They tell me I can't think for myself, that my mind is impotent. And wait a second, if my mind is impotent, so is my neighbor's. Wait a minute, how do I trust him? And what if he becomes destitute and they come after my stuff to feed him? I don't trust him anymore. And slowly, as the mind recedes in importance, well, how do I defend myself? How do I protect myself? How do I move forward in life? I need to join the group, a union, an organization, a lobby group, somebody who can help me out, somebody who can protect me, somebody who can stand up for my interests because my interests are being crushed by their interests. And slowly we turn into a country of pressure groups, of little cliques, each trying to grab as much of the pie as possible before the other group does. Because now it's a pie being distributed by the people, I'd say powerful people, politicians north of Richmond, but not just north of Richmond, in Richmond, and in Tallahassee, and in Sacramento, and in Austin, Texas. Not just the federal government, at every state level government. They're taking my stuff and giving it to others. They're taking my business and handing it over to other people. They're telling me I can't buy my competitor because of antitrust, but they're letting that deal go through and they're letting those people do it. By what standard? What has destroyed America is the mixed economy. Now, yes, America did very well for a long time under the mixed economy because it held on to that spirit of individualism, but that spirit of individualism is eroded, constantly eroded and eroded and eroded by an authoritarian state, by a mixed economy, by pressure group politics, by promises of politicians to take from this and give to there and destroy those people's rights in favor of those people's rights. Our intellectuals and our politicians have turned us one against the other, have turned American against American, neighbor against neighbor, individual against individual. And in order to defend ourselves, we had nothing. A vague sense of something the Founding Fathers said, but how many people understand what the Founding Fathers said? How many people understand what America was really about? How many people understand that FDR is the beginning of the end, in that sense, the beginning of the decline of America, not the savior that both left and right believe he is? The great American decline is the decline of American liberty, of American freedom. It's the rise of the mixed economy in every respect. It's the rise of, not just pressure groups in economics, but pressure groups in employment and pressure groups in academia. A rise in little tribalistic groups that want to grab whatever they can, not only material stuff, but cultural and academic power. You don't get a job based on what you know. You get a job based on the color of your skin. You get a job based on how much suffering you suffered as a child. You go into the university, Harvard or whatever, based not on your ability, not on your intelligence, not on the hard work you've put in, but based on some kind of criteria by which you can articulate how much you overcome, suffering or overcome oppression or being a victim. And somehow this culture, somehow this country of individualists, of people who say, don't tread on me, of pioneers, of entrepreneurs, somehow this culture has become a culture of victims, of victimhood, of elevating victimhood, of cheering on victimhood, and wanting to inflict victimhood on other people in order to reduce mine. Because that's the solution. Force. So the idea, the fact that force was never really eliminated from American politics, and the fact that force has been embraced as a tool in American politics, and that is the tool of the mixed economy, the tool of redistribution of favors, that has to lead to the kind of distrust and frustration and anger. And then, of course, you create a political system that can hand out favors, that's required to hand out favors, that demands handing out favors. A political system that has massive amounts of power on the lives of not just people in the United States, people all over the world. Then what kind of people are you going to attract to politics? You're going to attract people who are power lusters. You're going to attract people who are corrupt. And the fact that those people, the corrupt people in power, only alienates people more, only causes people to hate and resent even more. I mean, look at them. They're redistributing my wealth. They're going after my culture. They're going after my life. And they're just stealing. They're just walking away with huge amounts of money. What is up with that? They're crooks. We're governed by crooks. But it has to be that way. It's authoritarianism in any degree attracts the crooks, the power lusters, the people who don't want to work for a living, the people who want to exploit you, want to take your stuff. And whether it's the various congressmen with suitcases full of cash in their refrigerators or whatever, or though it's just congressmen that never get caught but somehow become rich, whether it's Hunter Biden, whether it's Jared Kushner, it's just ugly. It's ugly. And it causes even more resentment. And of course, a mixed economy involves cronyism. And cronyism means that we now have a hard time telling who are the good guys, who are the productive people, who are the not productive people. Who's got his job because of favors from the government, and who's got his job because he earned it. Who's a billionaire because of his genius achievements? Who's a billionaire because he milked Washington for everything he could, because he got favors, because he was protected? It's hard to tell. And when you can't tell who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, well, you become cynical about them all. And it's no surprise that it's the rich men north of Richmond. It's the rich men that he despises, that he doesn't trust. He could have easily said powerful men. He could have easily said politicians. But he chose to say rich men. But that's the culture. The culture is a culture that I think for the first time really in American history resents the wealthy, envies the wealthy. And you can understand why. Because it's hard to differentiate. It takes work to differentiate. It takes energy to differentiate, and it takes knowledge, and most people don't have knowledge. The average person doesn't know, can't tell the difference between an Alan Boyle and a Hank Creator. I think many on this chat can't tell the difference between Alan Boyle and Hank Creator. Never mind the common person. So of course they're going to resent rich people. Of course they're going to be anti-inequality. Of course they're going to vote for the first guy saying he's going to drain the swamp and ban them all and crush them all and destroy them all. Because he's just manifesting their own frustrations, manifesting their own ignorance, manifesting their own hatred, but more than anything, the frustration. America's been corrupted. It's been corrupted by an abandonment of liberty. It's been corrupted by the mixed economy. It's been corrupted by an abandonment of reason. By the idea that reason is not efficacious. By the idea that people cannot take care of themselves. And that is clearly the message out there. You cannot take care of yourself. You don't have a mind good enough to take care of yourself. You need us. We are there to save you. We are your saviors. We are your protectors. We are your helpers. We are your everything. Look to us, to Washington, for answers. And then when the answers don't come, and they're not going to come, then you resent Washington. But more than Washington, you resent everybody. You resent the system. You resent America. It's not an accident that we're experiencing a rise in deaths of despair, in suicides among working class people, among people who work for a living. Well, partially because they don't work, partially because they don't have jobs, and they're not expected to go look for jobs. They can live off of welfare. They can sit on the couch and watch TV all day and do nothing. They can survive that way. Nobody expects them to do differently. That's the mixed economy. That's the welfare state for you. It creates disincentives. You know, and lockdowns were a symptom, not a cause. COVID lockdowns could never have happened in a country with people with self-esteem. COVID lockdowns could never happen in a country with people who believed in themselves. It could never happen in a country. It would never be suggested in a free country. They could only happen in a country where people's rights, people's liberties, people's freedom were slowly and systematically eroded. Now, they could have happened in Sweden. They didn't happen by chance in Sweden, but they could have happened in Sweden. Sweden got lucky. But lockdowns are a symptom of the decline of America. It's one more manifestation of the decline in America. Because of, we're not going to get into the reasons for the lockdown now, but the fact that we tolerated them, the fact that we accepted them, and the fact that there's still people who next are going to advocate lockdowns for fossil fuels. And I think this one will go not as well. But people with self-esteem don't allow themselves to be locked down. People just accepted it. People just went on with it. Later on, they got angry. But it's easy to get angry when there's nothing at stake. So what made America great is individualism, individual rights, the government to protect individual rights. The cause of American decline is the abandonment of individualism, the abandonment of individual rights, the abandonment of individual responsibility for one's own life, one's own mind. And behind all that is an abandonment of reason as man's guide, abandonment of the belief that people, the knowledge, not the belief, the knowledge that people have the capacity to take care of themselves, have the capacity to think for themselves, to use their mind. The abandonment of reason really is behind much of the decline in our world. Why is science not advancing as fast? Why is technology not advancing as fast? It's not just regulations and control, but it's also, as you abandon reason, you abandon the one means of knowing things, of discovering new things. It's also, everything becomes bureaucratized again. It's a mixed economy. Science is even, inflicted by this. When what matters in science is giving a government grant or not giving a government grant, not whether something is true or not. That's a problem. Peer review was fine up to a point, but it's become calcified and rigid, and encourages everybody to just write papers about what everybody already knows, just changing things at the margin. Can't get a revolutionary paper approved, published. Can't get a revolutionary concept. You can't get a grant from the government for something new. But if you've written 75 papers already and you want to write a 76th paper that just makes a little change to the previous 75, the government is happy to give you a grant. One of the problems with government grants is much more likely to get a government grant, a science grant, a research grant, if you're old. But how many old scientists make revolutionary discoveries? How many old scientists challenge the status quo? How many old scientists do something completely new? Diego asked, was Newton peer-reviewed? Yes. Of course he was. He lectured in front of the what do you call it? The society in London. The I forget. He lectured in front of them, and he had to convince them that what he was saying was true. He published this book, and the book was immediately translated and published all over Europe, and scientists read it, and some of them agreed, and some of them disagreed, and they wrote to Newton. And they challenged him. There was a robust academic Royal Society. Thank you, Jennifer. God, I think I know that. With the Royal Society in London, there was a robust debate and discussion. Now, Newton's genius was clear, and they saw it. And of course, the other people who were doing the peer review were peers, or as close to peers as you could be to a Newton, who was a genius above all geniuses. They weren't just people who happen to get a PhD. And they debated, and they challenged, and they were convinced. Was Darwin peer-reviewed? Sure. Not in the formal sense of a journal article sent in and da-da-da, but people wrote reviews, people hated it, people liked it, people challenged certain things. He won out because his arguments were true and because the people who supported him stepped up and, wrote about it. And but there was a robust peer review comes from that period, the early Enlightenment. That's when you first get journals that starting to publish papers, and the editors are not sure which papers to publish or not, and they send it out to be reviewed by peers. It's not a bad concept. Somebody has to, look at this, and everybody has to look at this and decide if it's true or not, but the experts are the ones who are going to be able to tell. But they have to be peers. They have to be worthy. A journal can't publish everything. It has to decide what to publish and what not to publish. And all the peer review system is to help their editors decide what to publish and what not to publish. Now, again, I think the way it's done today is being corrupted and it's bad. And the way in which science is funded is horrible. But the real challenge is, Once you question reason, once you challenge reason, what's the standard for review? And the bigger issue is once you challenge reason, what's the standard for truth? I think the sciences have suffered significantly from bad philosophy. And as a consequence, our scientific advancements are puny as compared to previous periods, as compared to the early part of the 20th century, for example. And they seem to filter less down into actual technology, into actual applications than they did back then. All right, so there's no question that aside from the fact that America continues to grow economically, continues to create wealth, continues to innovate, all that is slowed down. It's all being done at a snail's pace. But in every other dimension of American culture, American society, there definitely seems to be a sense of decline, a sense of angst and anger, frustration. And it's not good. There seems to be some kind of real resentment of elites, real resentment of city folk. Now, again, you can understand that when you think that everything is redistributed, when you think that they are a power group that has more influence than you do and they're screwing you. But of course, the cities and the rich guys and the so-called elite are also the most productive people in this country. They're the people pushing the country forward, creating, building, and making. They're the ones that are making it possible for us to have a higher standard of living. But nobody notices that. Nobody cares about that. Of course, not all elites are like that. Certainly not the intellectual elites. They only corrupt and they only do damage. They only destroy. But the rich men north of Richmond, suddenly west of Richmond, but even north of Richmond, in Wall Street, in Boston, in biotech, they're producing, they're creating, they're building, they're growing this country. They're the one element in this country that is actually producing and growing. And whatever economic growth, meager economic growth we have, it's because of them. But we're going to see more and more and more populist resentment of success, more and more populist resentment of people with money, people who've been successful, people who live in cities, more and more resentment of innovation and progress. Because that's what is inevitable in a mixed economy. That's where it leads. That's where it heads. And in somewhat different ways, this is coming from both left and right. From left, it comes, of course, from the Marxist exploitation idea. From the right, it comes from some sense of which the country bumpkin is just, he's more American than the serial entrepreneur in the biotech industry in Boston. Not a healthy place to be. That both our political parties resent success, resent innovation, resent entrepreneurship, resent wealth, resent success. It also suggests that there's a lot less difference between the left and the right in America than we seem to think, which is always dangerous and always suggestive of, well, what if somebody can combine the two and get both sides to support them? Isn't that the path ultimately to authoritarianism and the ultimate American decline? So if we want to save America, if we want to stop the decline, if we want to reverse the decline, not just stop it, then we need to return to the spirit that made this country great. We need to return to the spirit of individualism. We need to return to a limited government that protects individual rights. We need to crush the mixed economy. Denounce the mixed economy. We need to reject those who attack success, whether they're left or they're right. We need to reject those who attack achievement, whether they're from the left or from the right. We need to embrace the individual, embrace a politics of individual rights without compromise. And to do that, we have to remind people or teach them anew that reason is our basic means of survival. That reason is what makes us human. That reason is our only way of knowing the world. And maybe there's an opportunity as America becomes more secular to achieve this latter. Maybe as America becomes less religious, there's an opening here. An opening to suggest to them the power of reason and therefore the power of science and the power of the individual to guide his own life, to take care of himself, to live the life that he sees fit, of every individual, and to return to a land where our neighbor, we perceive them as harmless. We perceive them as our ally, not as our enemy. And we can live in harmony and unity as one country. Not one country under God, but one country of individualists. People who care about their own life, leave other people alone and expect to be left alone unless they want to do otherwise, that is, to have a relationship. And for that, you have to dismantle the welfare state, and you have to dismantle the regulatory state, and you have to dismantle the scientific state, and you have to dismantle the educational state. We need liberty. We need freedom without compromise. All right. That's America's decline. All right. Let's see. So first, we're way off our target. So we got 92 people watching right now. So it's a good number. Ask questions. Super chat is available. $20 or more is preferred because we got a lot to make up for here. So please consider supporting the show, even if you're not asking a question with the sticker. You can do that with the sticker, and we'll do that. All right, let me take this question. I get this all the time. The song Richmond, north of Richmond, is about politicians, not Richmond. Washington, D.C. is north of Richmond. I think you're misunderstanding. Really? Well, first of all, Richmond is the capital of Virginia. There are a lot of politicians in Virginia. So why aren't you complaining about the politicians in Richmond? Are they that much better than the politicians in Washington, D.C.? And second, why is it rich men north of Richmond? Rich men, not powerful men, not politicians, but rich men. New York, by the way, Wall Street, is north of Richmond. Northern Virginia, where a lot of wealthy people live, is north of Richmond. Again, this is his choice of words. And, I don't know, let's... let's look at... I'm just pulling up the lyrics because, it really... I mean, you guys are reading what you want to read into it. I get it. You clearly want it to be about politicians because then you can support it. Then you can feel good about it, right? But that's not what the song is about. He's complaining about politicians to some extent. But that's not the primary. Here's the opening line. Where is it? The opening line has nothing to do with politics. The opening line has nothing to do with politicians and nothing to do with Washington, D.C. The opening line says, I've been selling my soul, working all day, selling my soul. Selling my soul. To whom? Whom's he selling his soul? And where does this sound familiar? Where does this come from? This idea that a worker, when he goes to work and earns a wage, sells his soul. Who does that idea come from? It comes from Marx. This is the whole idea of Marx, that wage labor, listen to Professor Wolff, the Marxist, wage labor is selling your soul to management, selling your soul to the owner of the factory. And the opening line of the song, and probably the most powerful, I've been selling my soul, working all day, overtime hours for bullshit pay. Who's paying him? Who's paying him? The government? Government's not paying him. I mean, he talks about Texas later, but who's paying him? The owner of the factory is paying him. So, overtime hours for bullshit pay. So I can sit out here and waste my life away. Where are the politicians? There are no politicians here. He's wasting his life away. Why? I would argue because he's chosen to. Because he's not doing more to make more of his life. Drag back home and drown my troubles away. Yep, he's depressed. He hates his job. He hates his life. He doesn't know how to guide his life. He doesn't know where to take his life. And if you just read that, whose fault is it? Well, at best, you could tell it's the fault of the factory owner, the rich man. Now, the chorus is living in the new world with an old soul. These rich men north of Richmond, Lord knows they all want to take total control. I want to know what you think. Want to know what you do. Now, that could be big tech. And they don't think you know, but I know that you do. Because your dollar ain't shit and it's taxed to no end because of Richmond, north of Richmond. Not, again, politicians haven't even entered in here. Yeah, there's taxes, but the taxes are there because the rich men want to subjugate you. The rich men are the one who lobbies for taxes to subjugate you. They don't pay the taxes. You pay the taxes. That's the mythology in the song. And then he says, I wish politicians, the first appearance of politicians this year, I wish politicians would look out for minors, and not just minors, different kind of minors, on an island somewhere, right? All right, he's making reference to Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein. Lord, we got folks in the street, ain't got nothing to eat, and they're beasts milking welfare. Again, one mention of politicians, I think, in the entire song. Then how does the song end? I've been selling my soul, working all day, overtime hours for bullshit pay. That's the song. I don't see where you see some kind of critique of Washington, D.C., some kind of critique of American politics. Yes, there's a critique of his life and a critique of somebody who's exploiting him, it appears. But that exploitation goes way beyond Washington, D.C. All right, Alex, Dino, thank you for the $50. Oh, so anyway, that's Eric, thank you for the question. But I get a lot of that, and you're projecting what you want onto the song. And so is the whole right-wing thing. But of course, it's not just projection. There is a real distrust of wealth, of business, of success among right-wingers today. Alex did another 20, $70. Thank you, Alex. Robert, thank you. I'm just doing the stickers quickly. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Gail. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, appreciate the support. Again, questions. We're short on questions, so if you want to ask, now's the time to do it. And again, you can support the show with just a sticker if you don't want to ask a question. Liam says, wasn't there a time in America where we promoted heroism over victimhood? Yes, not that long ago. But that shifted, right? Heroism is very individualistic. Heroism is very positive. Heroism is very much about achievement and success. And we become cynical about heroism because heroism is also about war. And America, it's always America's fault, the wars that we engage in. And by the way, we've lost all the wars we've engaged in. Since World War II, we've lost every single war. We basically lost Korea, stalemate. Lost Vietnam, definitely lost Vietnam. We lost Iraq. Iranians won that one. We lost Afghanistan to the Taliban. Pathetic. What wars have we won lately? Panama, maybe? I don't know. Grenada? We can't win wars. Maybe if we send weapons to the Ukrainians, they can win a war finally. But we can't. We can talk about why, but when you don't win wars, that also says, what's the point of heroism? What's the point if we're just going to lose? It's the whole attitude. And the policeman, what was it in that school, where the police basically just, the school shooting, where this guy was killing all these kids, and the police just basically sat outside, too afraid to enter the classroom. Too afraid. As these kids were being slaughtered, too afraid to do their jobs. Sorry, but that's a reality. Too afraid to do their jobs. Nobody forced them to be cops. So yeah, heroism, not a virtue anymore. Not a virtue. Victims are not very good at heroism. And heroism requires individualism. It requires an element of egoism. That is, heroism requires you valuing your life. Heroism requires having values. Heroism requires living up to those values. But you have to have values. You have to have a life. You have to be a human being. You have to be an individual to be heroic. And when you undermine individualism, when you undermine the value of the individual, when you undermine the value of his values and his choices and his mind, you're not going to get heroes. Heroes don't exist. Not real heroes don't exist in the land of collectivism. Yeah, maybe some of them are willing to die for their state, for the nation. And they do heroic acts. But on a day-to-day basis, you don't get heroes. They don't care enough about their own life to be heroic. Yeah, hero is somebody who fights against all odds for something he believes in. Risks his life or risks a lot in order to achieve something of importance against great obstacles. But for that, you have to believe in something. You have to want something. You have to care about something. That's pretty... Now, hopefully, those are all rational values. But you have to be a valuer. And to be a valuer, you have to value your own life. You have to have self-esteem. You have to care. All right, Daniel, thank you. $50 questions. That's great. We need quite a few of those. We need quite a few $50 questions to get to our goal for the evening. I don't know what's going on, guys. You guys are going to have to enlighten me about what's going on. My handyman spoke to some of his competitors who will try to profit off of their customers. Ignorance on maintenance projects, etc. Suggesting they need a new, he suggested they need a new garbage disposal when they don't, things like that. Could they make more money, honestly? Yeah. Yes, I think they could. This is, again, the difference between having a mind that respects your customers, that assumes your customers know something, that plans long-term, that can project long-term in terms of what different behaviors are going to do to your customer base and to your ability to keep a customer base. It requires people to think. I think the more corrupt the culture becomes, the more thinking is undermined, the more long-term planning is undermined. Think of Social Security as undermining your confidence in long-term planning. the more people become pragmatists and just go for the quick buck and for the momentary stuff. And we live in a culture that's very pragmatic, unprincipled, short-termism, thinking about the moment and thinking about how to achieve in the moment. That's the focus. So yes, absolutely. They would make more money if they thought long-term, but they'd have to think long-term to discover that. All right, Robert says, country America, rural America, America's heartland is great, except when they imagine they're victims of managers, businesses, CEOs, elites. Yeah, when they're actually massive beneficiaries of all of that. Right? I mean, country America doesn't produce that much. It doesn't. The heartland is not that productive. And it's not that big anymore. They pine for the days when they were farmers. But there are very few farmers in America today. Very few people farm. Most of the food we get produced is produced by big farm, big corporations, not by individual farmers. So they have no idea to the extent to which they are dependent, really dependent, on all the people and the things and that they hate, that they despise. And that's tragic and sad because it makes them into the enemies of their benefactors, the enemies of people who they should view as allies and who should just view as traitors on the traitor principle. James, does fear kill more dreams than failure ever could? Yeah. I mean, fear, lack of self-confidence, lack of self-esteem. Yeah, because the reality is that failure is inevitable in most endeavors in life if you're really pushing yourself, if you're really trying hard, if you're really pushing the envelope, if you're really challenging yourself. Failure is inevitable. Failure is not a killer of dreams. Failure is just one more obstacle you have to go through in order to achieve your dreams. But what really kills dreams, what really kills success and kills progress is the fear of failure. The lack of self-esteem that comes with dreading failure more than loving your dreams, loving what's possible. But life should be about pursuing, your dreams, pursuing and challenging yourself, pushing, trying, taking risks in every aspect of your life. Otherwise, you're not living. You're just cruising. You're just cruising. So to really live is to challenge, to strive, to push, to risk. Lewis says, what is the primary reason people love to hate America? It really depends. I mean, because a lot of people hate America, and they all hate America for different reasons. But certainly one reason people hate America is that America's been successful. And America's been successful in spite of the fact that it has an ideology and a system of government historically and a sense of life and a mentality historically that have gone against what people always thought was good and just and right. America succeeded because of limited government and individualism, because of a rejection of collectivism and in some respects of altruism, because of its embrace of reason, even though it was relatively religious. And that pisses people off to no end. America has been successful by doing things that people have been taught and people have accepted are vices, are ills, are wrongs. America's been successful by, focusing on vices, as people see them. The vice of individualism, the vice of individual success, of people caring about their own happiness as a primary. So, the left hates America because it was capitalist and it succeeded because of capitalism and it's relatively free. And it stands up against the bogus idea that has no evidence in history that central planning and philosopher kings are much better at achievement. So it stands against, in opposition to, and it proves everything they hold is wrong. America's hated by certain religionists because it's fundamentally a secular country. Even though people in the country are religious, the country is a secular country. Its institutions are run as secular institutions. Its orientation philosophically is secular. It's about, again, individuals pursuing their happiness, which is a secular idea. America is hated because America is successful because of its entrepreneurs. Again, individuals of extraordinary ability, not because of its masses. America is successful because of its cities, not because of the country folk. So the country folk resent it. America is successful because of individualism and capitalism. That's why it's hated. And the libertarians, of course, hate it because it's successful in spite of being a state. It's a repudiation of the idea that states are horrible, that states are a disaster, that states can never produce anything good. Yeah, America has. It's done pretty well. In spite of its ills, of its sins, done pretty well. Frank says, your logical arguments help me personally to generate ideas that are strangely asymmetrical. All right? Raising consciousness and energy level for my thinking. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Frank. I really, really appreciate that. And really, really appreciate your support over years now. Thank you, Frank. That was $50. That's great. All right, we made a little bit of progress, but all right, we got 3 questions left. Come challenge me. Put up a super chat question that says I'm all wrong and tell me why I'm wrong. Or ask me a challenging question about something we talked about or didn't talk about today. Or about anything, about life, about the world, about war, about peace, about anything. All right, James says, just to clarify on a super chat question you answered the other day, there is no such thing as overthinking. It's non-thinking. No, it's not non-thinking. It's thinking. It's thinking when the context is inappropriate for thinking. I know, but sometimes you have to rely on what you've automatized. Sometimes you have to rely on your subconscious. If I start thinking as a logical process, as something in the middle of talking, then I'd have to stop. I mean, as I'm talking, to a large extent, I'm relying on past thinking, and I'm letting my subconscious feed. Now, hopefully it's logical and consistent because that's what I have. That's what's kind of, I've trained my subconscious to provide me. But in terms of thinking, in terms of sitting there and actually going through an argument, I mean, that you do, and sometimes you can do that in inappropriate places and inappropriate points. And those are points, and I don't think that's non-thinking. I think if in the middle of the tennis match, you stop to think, okay, I need to step into the ball and I need to take my racket back. That's thinking, right, in a sense. Not appropriate then. If you do that, you're going to be a bad tennis player. At some point, you got to go into an emotion when you practice, but at some point, you have to, same thing with driving, you have to rely on your automatic responses. And that's not non-thinking, that's thinking where it's not appropriate to be doing that. You're supposed to be doing something else. Now, it's not always appropriate to think. Sometimes you got to put thinking aside. I don't know. Hopefully that makes sense. Andrew says, in honor of Matt Walsh, who loves the song, what do you think of the masculine quality of its message? It's whiny. It's not masculine. It's a whiny song. Why is that masculine? It's not feminine, but it's weak. Right? Masculinity is about, oh, I hate my job. I'm going to go home and I'm going to put a bullet in my head. That's not masculine. Masculine is, damn it, I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to go start a business. I'm going to go show those men north of Richmond how it's done. I'm going to prove to them that individuals can take care of themselves. I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to start a business. I'm going to get rich myself, and I'm going to teach those bastards a lesson. I think that's more masculine. But this is like, I'm going to go and take my wages, my bullshit wages, and just... Profanity doesn't make something masculine. Whining doesn't make something masculine. Complaining doesn't make something masculine. Standing up to the man by whining doesn't make something masculine. Masculine means decisiveness in the face of action, according to Ayn Rand, something like that, right? Decisiveness. But in the face of action, what are you going to do? Tell us how you're going to change your life. Tell us how you're going to change the world. Tell us how you're going to make things better. That's masculine. This song is not masculine. God, it's not masculine. All right, Jennifer writes, she's got a Neil Peart quote for us. Hold your fire. Keep it burning bright. Hold the flame till the dream ignites. A spirit with a vision is a dream with a mission. Now that's masculine. Keep it burning. Be a hero. Be a risk taker. Have a vision. Keep it alive. Yeah, I mean, I don't get how Matt Walsh is not masculine. I mean, do you guys find Matt Walsh masculine? I mean, he's a whiner. I don't find people who complain all the time and are miserable all the time and everything's wrong in the world and everything's bad and all they can think about doing is complaining about it and then suggesting we have to return to the Bible or something. And if everybody else's wife made them dinner at night, wouldn't the world be a better place? That's masculine? I mean, masculine is striving for something new, something great, an adventure, something exciting, something that pushes the boundaries. When Elon Musk says, the regulators can shake their fists at the sky, that's masculine. That's like, screw you. I'm going to get it done. And I don't care what you think. And you will be able to do nothing about it. Patrick says, I do like when my wife makes dinner. Me too, because the alternative is me making dinner, and that would be awful. But I also like it when we go to a restaurant. That's good too. That's fine. God. I don't know. I don't find swearing to be masculine. I don't find speaking down or looking down at women to be masculine. I don't find the macho stuff, being physical, as masculine. What I like is having self-esteem and self-confidence and a devotion to your life and to ideas and to action and to changing the world, and that confidence of knowing how to change the world, and that independence that is so American. That's masculine. Cowboys are masculine because they can live out there in the middle of nowhere with nothing. They can take care of themselves. They know how to handle a horse. They know how to handle a cow. They know how to handle, the wilderness. They know how to survive in the wilderness. Race car drivers are masculine because they can take control of a car, of an unbelievably fast car, and they can drive it with precision and exceptionally well. Country singers who whine about, oh, the government is hurting me and I don't make enough money. That's not masculine. Right? So, people say, bring those immigrants in. I'm not afraid of them. Let them compete with me for my job. Let them bring their skills. Let me trade with them. That's masculine. Oh my God, I'm afraid. Nothing masculine about that. Right? I don't know. I don't find very many rock musicians as masculine. I never got it. But I know women do, so I shouldn't think so. But anyway, all right. I don't know. Real cowboys. That Doodle Bunny. What is your favorite sounding language? Hebrew, French. Actually, I think my favorite sounding language is Portuguese. Portuguese from Brazil. Not Portuguese from Portugal. Sorry. People from Portugal. I know you don't like the Brazilian Portuguese, but Brazilian Portuguese, there's a singing nature to it. There's a rhythm to it that I think is really beautiful. And Brazilian music is wonderful, just wonderful, particularly bossa nova. If you really want soothing, romantic, beautiful, just relaxing music, try bossa nova from the 60s and 70s, but the singers who sing it today, there's new bossa nova being written today. It's so soothing, it's so beautiful, and the language is so fitted for that. That's my favorite. I love Italian, the particular accent. I love French to listen to it. I don't understand any of these languages. I don't understand a word. I hate Russian. I hate Ukrainian. I hate Finnish. I hate German. I have all the Germanic languages. I don't like Germanic language. It's definitely the case that with the Romantic languages are the prettiest sounding to the ear. But of the Romantic languages, I would say the best are the Brazilians. I don't like Icelandic. But that's just like Danish and Norwegian pushed together, something like that. Anyway, and I don't particularly like Hebrew. French. If you're gonna go with that, French. Michael says, is learning to be calm when you're disrespected a virtue or sacrifice? I mean, I think it's a virtue. I mean, again, the disrespect does not hurt you. It's not about you, it's about them. So to get super upset adds nothing to your life. You might want to remember who disrespected you and have nothing to do with them again. That's good. What do you call it? Memory is good. Justice is good. Not dealing with people who disrespect you is good. All right, we got 2 questions left. Eric says, thanks, Yaron. I don't even like the song. I just think it's clearly referring to government. Taxes, IRS, government control, government regulation, watching you. And I say, I just don't, I mean, there's some of that, no question. But most of it is not about that. Most of it's not about that. And there's very little about regulation. It's mostly about taxes and welfare. Those are the only two things that really come up as taxes and welfare. And I don't think it's primarily about politicians. It's about generally corruption. It's about, again, the opening lines and the closing lines. Those are the most important. And I think those are the frustration with wage labor. And that's there. Now, it's a mixture. It's both frustration with wage labor and frustration with taxes and frustration with welfare. But that's most of it. It's this mishmash, typical of the new right. They hate capitalism and they hate statism as well. Cook said, "Oh, I'm not going to read your thing, Cook. I know it's a joke, but still, it's not funny." Sorry. He basically blames me for the decline of America, but he's joking. All right, let's see. I think we're done. All right. Thank you to all the super chatters. I appreciate it. I guess I need more positive topics because the decline of America did not fund itself. Maybe I need to learn a lesson from that and just do topics that fund themselves, which tend to be more positive topics. But there was a bunch of positive stuff in there. All right. Thank you, guys. I appreciate the support from the super chatters. Those of you who listen afterwards would love to have your support on a monthly basis. You can do that on Patreon. You can do a subscribe site. You can do a one-time gift. You can do a regular monthly gift. But Patreon and yaronbrookshow.com/support is PayPal. I'll see you all tomorrow at 3. We'll be talking about China. We'll see. Maybe China will evoke more income. It'll be interesting.